All right. So are you back to hosting then, Garrett?
Apparently I am. I didn't. Okay, that was weird. I didn't know I
Whatever.
could just forcibly take that.
It works.
Take it,
Zoom-
Garrett.
Zoom
Guy
is
Giant
the-
Green G.
Thank you, Giant Green G, for doing everything. That was fantastic.
Hey,
Oh,
Noah.
So
Hello.
while we are waiting, let's do some introductions. So obviously you guys know a little bit about me. I'll introduce myself once the presentation starts. I have a slide for that. I know. But so obviously I know Garrett. I've known Garrett. Garrett, how long have we known each other? Like 5 years, 6 years probably?
Yeah, probably about that.
Yeah, probably about that much. I've known Garrett since he was a wee lad, as it were. I knew pre-college Garrett. So, but we've known each other for a long time, but I don't know you guys. So it'd be awesome to get to know you folks before we start in earnest. Who wants to go first? Don't everybody jump at once.
All right, I'll go first. Hi, I'm Grace.
Grace.
Hello. I became the president of the Indies Club, the SU Indies, just this year.
Okay.
I'm a junior, turning senior, and game design was a passion for me. It still is a passion for me. I just can't see. I'm curious about the career field itself, so that's what a lot of my questions are going to be on. Excellent.
Hopefully I will be able to answer a lot of those because I had a very weird entry into this field. So it'll be this. Yeah, we can chat. There's a lot that you can learn, but it's a very weird road for a lot of people. So
yeah,
the traditional 9-to-5 path in the game design industry basically doesn't exist. At least not at first. So, but it is there. It's not a pipe dream. It is there, but it takes a little while to get there. But we can talk about that at length. All right, who else?
I'm Logan.
Hello, Logan.
I'm one of the exec members for the SU Indies, all about independent game design. It was the first and only club I joined when I came to college because I was like, oh, I'm gonna go meet some friends, and then they said, hey, we have a game development club, and I said, I'm in.
Yeah.
So I've done a couple of game jams here and there. I would definitely love to have this be my career.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah.
Awesome. Has anyone ever told you that you bear a striking resemblance to the character from Stranger Things?
Oh my God, the Steve?
Yeah, you look.
The hair.
It's the flow.
Oh.
It's definitely I mean, facially too, I think, which is a compliment because he's like probably the best character in that show. I think I love Steve.
Oh wow! Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You see what we're talking about?
I could try to do something like that. That's a lot of gel though.
It is a lot of gel, but you're welcome for a very easy Halloween costume next year.
I appreciate it.
Yeah,
Whenever my hair is poofier and down to its sides, people say I look like that French philosopher Descartes.
Oh, yes. Yeah, actually, no, I can see that.
The treated
old
myself.
portrait. Yeah, you need a very frilly collared jacket in order to pull off the Descartes look. But no, you could do it.
Logan, why would you ever?
I love it.
Oh my God, I love that picture. Anyway.
All right, who else wants to introduce themselves? Then we'll get started once all the introductions are finished.
I guess I'll go. I'm Noah.
Hello,
I'm just
Noah.
a member of the club.
Hey, that's all right. It counts. All members are important. We like that.
That's true. That's so true.
Takes a village. Takes a village to raise a kid. It takes 6 villages to make a successful game. So, because trust me, I've been there for some really rough prototypes that I was like, you showed this to 3 people, didn't you? You can tell. So it's always good. All right. Who else wants to go next? We're introducing ourselves.
Introduce yourself.
Oh, hi.
Hello.
Hi, Mr.
Hello.
Ott. It's a pleasure.
Oh my gosh. You don't have to call me Mr. Ott. You can call me Kyle. It's all right. You're not one of my students.
All right.
I teach 5th grade English, so during the school year, and then I do my game design work in the summers. So please don't call me Mr. Ott. It makes me feel impossibly old.
Okay, Kyle. Don't.
Introduce yourself, Will. You got this.
Oh, I was supposed to introduce myself. Oh,
yeah, we're
hi.
just doing introductions because I know Garrett, but I haven't had a chance to meet all of you guys yet. So before we begin, just give people some time to filter in if they are going to filter in.
Well, I'm Will. I'm the SGA representative for the club.
Nice.
Any student government issues pretty much go to me, and all campus events and all that stuff. And yeah, the exec board gets to deal with me, so that's fun.
Nice.
Star
It
Wars
is
fan.
fun.
Are you a Star Wars fan?
Yes, sir. That
That is fantastic. We just had a show and tell. We had a show and tell on Zoom with my students, and I have the original box set on VHS, the golden box set.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Oh my god, I was about to pull it out.
We've done it. We've done it. It's his
I
presentation.
don't know if
Yeah, there we
this
go.
There it is.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about, Will.
Yeah,
There we go.
this is the only one I have, but
A man of culture. I love it. It's the best one of the films, by the way, Empire Strikes Back.
We have the whole set somewhere
Yeah,
in our
that's-
basement.
that's not up for debate. But I mean, I'd say my personal favorite's Return of the Jedi. But I mean,
That's fair. No, that's fair. That's fair, though.
Hello.
If you said Revenge of the Sith, I would have had to kick you from the Zoom meeting. So
I have no problems with that movie.
it
From the
definitely
movie.
Hayden Christensen's performance has not aged particularly well, but I'll be honest, there are elements of the movie that I find that I enjoyed a lot more now than I did as a kid looking back on it. And I'm like,
Hmm.
okay, it's not great, but it's not as bad as I remember it being.
Oh yeah. I mean, as a kid, I missed out on it. Like when I went to go see it. So I mean, actually, I did go see it, but like I fell asleep. So, you know, it's the appreciation has sort of grown over the years. But
See, I was probably like 8, 10, I think, when that film came out. So I actually got to see it in theaters. Like my parents like let us go, and they bought like the popcorn that had like wasn't Darth Maul on it, which I mean that's a huge waste if there's not Darth Maul on your popcorn. But all right, getting sidetracked though. But I mean I'll get
yeah,
sidetracked.
I did not mean to get sidetracked.
No, that's okay. That's all right. All right. So I'm waiting to hear from Matthew and Alex. Alex, I think you just joined late. We're introducing ourselves. Hello, I'm Kyle.
Hello, I'm Alex.
Hello, Alex. Fantastic.
Hi, I'm Matthew.
Hello, Matthew. All right.
I'm
then
the historian for the club.
excellent. So that when this is all said and done, this talk will be etched into the annals of the game club by you.
Absolutely.
Excellent. I'm assuming you brought a stone tablet and chisel for that. Well done. It's the only way to do that, obviously. All
Is
right.
it really working from home if you're not using cuneiform?
No.
Exactly.
No, it is not. I have a friend who's an archaeologist, and so sometimes I'll send some fun facts to her. But apparently, we know the majority of what we know about cuneiform because there was a Babylonian merchant who would regularly swindle other people by selling them cheaper versions of the products they would buy. And so these people would send what amounts to like ancient Babylonian hate mail on these cuneiform stone tablets, which are like this thick and this long. Well, this guy was apparently very successful and very wealthy because he spent the majority of his fortune building an add-on to his home to house and protect the hate mail that he got.
Oh
That's
my
amazing.
goodness.
that
Peak,
that
that's
reminds
peak.
me. There's this
Oh,
there's this guy on TikTok that I follow, and
Okay.
he makes his username is unnecessary inventions. So,
Yes.
for example, he showed off the other day the sourdough bread bag.
yeah.
It's like a kind of just like a shoulder bag, right? It holds one loaf of sourdough bread. It's got a slot for a cutting board and a
Yes.
slot for a bread knife.
Yeah.
And on his wall in the background, whenever he's showing off his like new invention, his set is shelves of all the cease and desist letters he's gotten for making things like Crocs, but as a hat.
Yeah. I think I've seen he has Crocs for your fingers, right? I think
Yeah,
I've seen
I
that.
think that was
I've
another
seen
one.
that guy's stuff before. But yeah, I think it's hysterical that we know a lot of our understanding of ancient cuneiform comes from one guy's copious amount of hate mail that he decided to save, which is just, I mean, that's such a flex.
The first troll.
Not only do you steal their money, but you use their money.
to store their hate mail. It is probably not a great guy, but definitely an interesting story. All right. I will talk about historical facts all day with you guys if I get the chance. So we're gonna transition from now into the presentation. Garrett, if it's okay with you, I am going to share my screen, and then what I'm gonna do as well is I can actually make this link available to you guys later because I've included some other helpful links for you. I'm a big fan of practical application. I am the one I absolutely despise going to talks as a student. I absolutely hated going to talks as a student where you would show up and you're like, great, I spent 30 minutes of my life and I now know basically the same amount that I learned coming in. That is what I would like to avoid with today's presentation. So a lot of this is going to be practical application, stuff that I have either done, stuff that I have experienced, or stuff that has been experienced by the people that I work with. And that includes a pretty wide swath of professionals within the game industry. I know many of you are interested in video games. I primarily work within the tabletop gaming space. However, there is a ton, and I mean a ton of bleed over between those two industries. So I've tried to make a lot of that stuff applicable because let's be real, if you can make a solid video game, you can make a solid board game. If you can make a solid board game, you can make a solid video game. And what we're seeing now is a lot more people coming over from that too. Zoom show of hands, how many of you are familiar with The End is Nigh or Super Meat Boy or Binding of Isaac? Edmund McMillian has gone on the record and said he would probably have quit game design entirely. He's the co-creator of those games if it wasn't for board games, because he just got sick and tired of dealing with that space and that industry. He just released a game on Kickstarter where everyone plays as tapeworms. I'm not even joking. It's raised like, I think the last time I checked it, it was like 60 grand, 75 grand already. Yeah. So there's, like I said, there's a lot of bleed over. So I'm trying to make it applicable. This presentation is called What I Wish I Knew About Game Design. As I mentioned to Grace, my entry into this career path has been incredibly strange and very weird. A lot of the lessons that I have learned that I'm hoping to impart to you guys today are things that I had to learn on my own. In some cases, in brutal fashion, shall we say. My idea with this is when I sat down to make the presentation, I thought about, man, if I could talk to me circa college, what would I want past me to know about? What would I want past me to have, the tools that I want past me to have to be successful within this space, which is kind of how I framed this. So a little bit about me. Oh, if this doesn't free, oh boy, there we go. All right, that's me right there with the Catan sheep. That right there, that fine gentleman smiling behind me is the president of the Game Manufacturers Association of America. He's also the COO of Yellow Games. That's my boss, Stefan Brousseau, who's a great dude. So I began making games in college at Mount St. Mary's University in Emmitsburg, Maryland. If anyone's familiar with that, there's a giant golden statue of the Virgin Mary jutting out from the mountains. Can't miss it. I actually began there working with our history department. I worked on creating 12 ready-to-play board games for their history curriculum. I co-designed and co-taught as a junior at the school. We taught a history-based board games class, and then I helped put together a grant for our library. So we're one of the few colleges where there's a board game section of our library where you can actually go and actually check out a board game like you would a book. And that library, that section is still there to this day, which is really cool. It's probably one of the things I'm most proud of. After that, I graduated. I went and got my master's from Syracuse University, Newhouse School of Public Communications. I moved to Los Angeles after that to do a short stint with Floor 84 Studios. They are a mobile design team. That's where I worked as a level designer. I worked on Barbie Starlight Adventure, Your Welcome World. Programmed, I spent probably 2-3 weeks working on the Barbie Skrillex music mashup minigame that happens at the end of each level. So I would show up with like my Slayer t-shirt and my much longer beard, and I would put my headphones on and listen to that basically for 9-10 hours a day, which was pretty fun. Actually, I really enjoyed it. That's probably the most fun I've had actually working on a video game project was Barbie Starlight Adventure, but I worked on Hot Wheels Make It Epic Road Race as well. And an upcoming, I don't know if it ever got released, but we were in the middle of prototyping something for Cheech and Chong, which was weird. We worked for their agents essentially, which is very strange. I moved back home because I like the East Coast. I like my family. I did about 7 months, close to a year in escape room design, which is pretty fun. And currently, I'm a member of the demo team for Yellow Games. COVID has sort of derailed it, but I should be taking over a actual demo team lead role in the coming future. I am technically a consultant with Yellow Games as well. I have a degree in education, and so I am working on transforming all of our games and making them sellable. And I just scored my first publishing deal over the summer, so I have a party game coming out called Happy Cactus that is going to be coming out over the year. If you want to follow me on Twitter, there's my Twitter handle. That's like a huge thing now. Everyone's like, oh, throw your Twitter handle in your presentations. So if you'd like to, we're doing that. I'm designing Happy Cactus, though, for a company called Duck Yeah Games. I'm also working on 2 other titles for Duck Yeah Games, as well as a couple other projects that are in the works. A little bit about me. All right, the non-game related stuff. The first thing, and Grace, this is something that I wanted to share, especially with you, is that the first thing that no one ever talks about in getting a job in the game field is it's almost very, very little of it has to do with games, to be completely honest. A lot of how people get their job and get their titles actually comes from your people skills, your soft skills. It's one of the things that I really wanted to touch on first, because the biggest thing that you need to start doing on right now is networking. I am well aware that networking is probably one of the most heinous sounding words in the English language. You say networking and usually people immediately shrivel up and want to die, which I totally understand. Like the idea of going out to a room full of people and like being like, hey, hello, how are you? I'm Will. It's really nice to meet you. I like Star Wars. Please hire me. Is kind of a daunting prospect. So I wanted to break it down into smaller chunks. All of my jobs have not come from a networking event, but they have all come from networking. And here's what that looks like. The first thing you should do is start local. If you have a comic store, if you have a game store, if you have a local library, if you have a church group, I'm dead serious. I'm blanking. I think Concordia, which is one of the best-selling board games of all time, started because the designer would go to, like, I think it was a bingo night in his church basement, and then would play it with some of the people there. So no joke. Actually, one of the earliest designers of Dungeons and Dragons was a youth pastor at an Episcopalian church in the Midwest, and would bring his D&D modules in to go play with the youth group. I also think is hysterical. Find a group of like-minded people who are all at about your skill level or all at about your position level, which right now is nothing, right? Because you're all students. And start working with those people. Start playing games with those people. We just had a game store open up at my local town, and I've been hanging out there because I love games, not really trying to network. And over the course of that, I now get paid to play Dungeons and Dragons every other week at $10 an hour. Which if you told 8-year-old me at some point you're going to get paid in pizza and actual money to play Dungeons and Dragons, which you do for free, I'd have probably been like, you're an idiot. That's not a job, but it is. And that's like an example of that low tier networking, right? Go find a place that you like hanging out and like enjoying. If you're a good person, if you're somebody who is fun to be around and you're doing stuff that you actually enjoy, it's not going to feel like networking to you. Seriously, you should trick yourself into networking. My quote unquote networking at that store was me showing up 3 times a week and playing Skull with the regulars, or dropping in to go play Shadows of Brimstone with some of the store owner's kid or whatever. Like it's a simple rule. And you guys are already kind of doing it as a whole. Most of you, by nature of joining this club and taking on a leadership role in this club, are already starting to network. You might not know it now, but later on down the road, right, let's say that Matt winds up getting a job at a smaller studio and they're looking for someone who does 3D renders, and then they remember, he's like, oh, Noah, my friend Noah from Salisbury, I know he was messing around in Blender. Maybe I'll put a call into him and see what happens. And maybe that's how you get some work down the road. I have a friend of mine who has done that exact route. He's still living out in Los Angeles, still working in video games, but got his job because I think it was a friend of his roommate knew what he was doing, called him up and said, hey, I've got a 3-month gig. And he goes, hey, 3 months? Oh, that's not what I want. I want to skip just yet. He's like, hey, 3 months, that's exactly perfect. That's what I need. And that turned into a full-time thing. Immediately go bigger after you've worked your way up from that smaller, that comic store, that game store level. Start going to smaller conventions. We are actually spoiled for choice with smaller conventions on the East Coast. Show of hands, how many of you guys went to Unpub last year or 2 years ago?
The club goes, we go as a trip for the club.
Perfect. But yeah, that's a great example of a convention. I remember seeing a couple of you guys there, I think, but that's a great example of a good smaller show. You don't want to start with something big. You want to go to a place where you can actually talk to people, meet with some designers. I have friends from that show who I actually ran into at a bigger show now. And so it's fun. Like you get to wind up having more, again, it's that networking thing where it's like, because I played their party game at 2 a.m. at the bar at Unpub, I wound up getting into a meeting where now all of a sudden I'm sitting across the table from somebody who works for Haba, who says, hey, do you do educational game consultancy? Let's talk, because their company's looking to hire somebody after COVID is over to start doing some of that. So now all of a sudden I have a job interview because I played games at 2 a.m. at a bar in Maryland. Again, networking is not just the stereotypical, quote unquote, the networking event, right? You can go to those smaller shows. LinCon, has anyone been to LinCon or heard of LinCon? It is big in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Gettysburg College actually just did it. They established it. Their first show was like, I think 2,000 people. I think last year's there was already up to 5,500, which is actually really cool. Somebody's popping up in the chat. All right. Right, so 5,500 people. That's a great one. York, Pennsylvania, Lancaster, Pennsylvania, both of those small towns have small Comic-Cons. How many of you guys are familiar with the game Munchkin? Has anyone ever heard of the game Munchkin? Awesome.
Munchkin.
Yeah, it's a great game. And at the Lancaster Comic-Con, which had all 1,500 people, Steve Jackson Games actually sent a Steve Jackson Games rep for the company to play Munchkin. Because I guess he was local, and they said, hey, if you're around, we'll pay you your normal salary to go to this show. You never know who you're going to meet, but these smaller shows are a great example, because a great place to network, I should say, because not everyone is running around. Shows, you wind up making those great connections. The biggest ones that I can think of, though, are the big conventions. I have been to most of the big ones now at this point in my life, which is great. I was supposed to go to Essen, Germany for the biggest game convention in the world. I don't know if that's going to happen because we have a pandemic going on. I'm not sure if everyone's aware of that. But you can join a demo team. And this is true actually for the video game industry as well. I know Blizzard and Microsoft occasionally put out calls to local individuals. Or if you're a fan of PAX, the Penny Arcade Expo, I have a friend who's an enforcer, and she has been an enforcer on every single PAX show. And because they pay her to go. And that's a great way to make some connections. If you're interested in joining a board game demo team, I would sincerely encourage you to reach out to Yellow Games. Cough, cough, I work for them. They're great. That is the best package of any demo team I've ever worked for. But Renegade Games is also really great. Smirk and Dagger, I personally know the CEO of that company. They do a great job as well, as does Haba USA. Please don't tell Haba I put an extra B in their name. But those are all great examples to network. Case in point, like the last time I quote unquote networked, it was because I ran into the CEO of Smirk and Dagger. He had an unpublished prototype, and we played that for 40 minutes while we talked about the ideal way to drink a margarita. Like there are ways that you can make this enjoyable, is what I'm trying to tell you. It doesn't have to be a bad thing, but really you need to start tricking yourself into networking and putting yourself out there more. It's going to be super helpful for your aspirations, both to get a career and also to make some friends, to make these conventions less of a crapshoot. It's not like you're going into a place where you know nobody. It's now, oh, okay, cool. I know 6 different people I can go have dinner with, go sing karaoke with, go see the town or whatever after the show is over. Really important to start doing that early and often. All right, the next thing you need to start doing is you need to make a playtest group immediately. How many of you guys have a game idea in your head right now? Yes. Logan's like, right here, dude. I'm doing the jazz fingers just for that. Logan, what's your game idea?
Oh God. It was.
Oh god.
This was half.
Pitch it to me in 3
half-baked.
sentences.
Okay.
You got 3 sentences.
2D boxing fighting game. Character based on chess movements.
Oh, okay. So almost like the footwork of a boxing match. I've heard described from several professional prize fighters is very much like chess. Awesome.
Yeah.
That's a great
I was
thing
thinking
to do.
to like really lean into the chess idea and have like special moves of the person be like off of like the movements of chess pieces.
Yeah, and see that could be really interesting as well. I'm thinking of, has anyone ever played Crypt of the Necrodancer? Very popular.
I have, yep.
Yes, very popular indie game. I'm thinking of that boss fight where all of the guys are chess moves and that's how they move around. So
yeah,
that could be cool. Have you play tested this game yet?
No, not at all.
All right, so this is why you make a playtest group. It's not just to get ideas and data for your future work. A lot of it is motivation. We have a playtest group in Hanover, Pennsylvania. There's a store called Let's Play Games and Hobbies. If you're ever in the Hanover, Pennsylvania area on a Thursday night and you would like to drop by and bring a game to test, we will be there. That's what we do on Thursdays. It is a huge motivating factor to know that there are 6 other people who have games to play and holds you accountable to doing that. Like, you want to have something to show on Thursday nights because you know there's a guarantee that it's going to get played on Thursday nights. Another important reason to get a playtest group together, ideas. Maybe I look at Logan and say, man, the chess idea is great, but you're kind of getting lost in the weeds. You've got all these different pieces who all do different things. If it's about boxing, shouldn't it just be about one piece that has a multitude of different moves? And like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. And maybe it's a terrible idea, right? Obviously, Logan, I don't know if that's going to work for your particular game or not, but it's an idea that you could try. I'm going to embarrass Garrett for a second because Garrett was part of my playtest group for Happy Cactus, which is the game that's getting published. Garrett actually made an incredibly sizable contribution to that game. Originally, there were not actions. You take 2 actions each turn. Originally, you just did. Why don't you just make a list of actions that you can do and then just do 2 actions a turn? And that wound up being the thing that kind of broke it from a conflict where it was an idea.
You're
Right.
cutting out a little bit for me.
Who said that? Sorry.
Alex.
Is that Matt? Oh, was that Alex? Am I back?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
You're cutting out for me too. I don't know if it was.
Yeah, it was for me as well.
That's all right. Just if I do that, guys, just slow me down so we make sure that I'm okay, right?
Yep.
But what I was saying though is it makes it easier to network. If you know that the people from your playtest group are going to be at PAX or are going to be, if they're going to go to E3 or if they're going to go to MagFest or Gen Con, or heck, even if it's like Rocky Mountain Con out in Colorado or whatever, then at least you've got people to hang out with. It's not really a daunting experience. It's kind of a group of people that you can spend time with. Again, too, the other thing is that you want people who understand how a playtest works. How many of you guys have shown a game to a family member or loved one? Whether it's your game or somebody else's. Will, were they really nice about it, even if it didn't seem like they got it?
Oh, do you mean do you mean like a indie, like actual like game?
Anything. It could be a game you made. It could be a game that you like a whole lot. I tried showing my parents BioShock once. And they were like, "What is this?"
Because my dad plays. Well, I play Grand Theft Auto online.
Okay.
And so does my dad.
Awesome.
He actually got me into it, and he still plays it, but he plays it more than I do. So.
Okay. So that's really cool. That's awesome. Usually, I think I'm speaking from my experience a little bit, but like I show my games or some games to my family members, and they're like, I don't understand why. Is this like Candyland? Or they'll say nice things because that's what they feel like you want to hear is nice things. A playtest group knows to be brutal. A playtest group knows to take you down a couple notches if your game is bad, or if they're like, this doesn't make sense, or could you clarify this? Really, really important to get a playtest group started. You guys could probably make a playtest group now if you really wanted. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Because you have a built-in network, and because you're all in college and all living in the same place, obviously not now because of everything going on, but if you're all living in the same place and working on those ideas, it's a really great opportunity. And I'll be honest, I'm very fortunate. I know a lot of designers who don't have the environment that I have here after they left college or after they left their job at the city they originally lived in. So make that now and start leveraging that now because you can get a lot of great stuff. All right, soft skills out of the way. We're going to get to the game-related stuff. That's what everyone loves. All right, how many people are familiar with agile development? I know a lot of you. Yes, I see one hand. Who else? Just Grace? Nope, Alex is familiar with it too. Matt's giving me the thumbs up. Awesome. Agile development is something that is getting ready more and more now. It's even being used in the tabletop space. I use it all of the time. For those of you unfamiliar of what agile development is, I'll make this pretty quick. It is the steps that you take to make what we call a minimum viable product, or the MVP, which is the smallest amount of work to get something that is usable into a customer's hands, or potential customer's hands. So for me, right, it is an example. I don't have to print out or make a professionally made prototype of a card game. It could be an old Dragon Ball Z trading card game stuffed into whatever old card sleeve I've got. And then I cut out a piece of paper and I stuff it into the card sleeve and it's ready to play. It doesn't need to look pretty. It doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to exist in the space so that you can actually put it in people's hands and start getting feedback immediately. It is super important. I know several designers who come to our meetups and like, oh, I have a great idea for I'll pick on one of our designers. His name is Chuck. He's like, I've got a great idea for, it's a dice game with a dungeon, and I'll bring it next week. I'll bring it next week. He's been saying I'll bring it next week for 3 months. I've never seen it, and chances are I will probably die long before I ever see this game played, because it's too much. It's too expansive. Great, break it into smaller chunks and bring it to a night. If you have a game that is a 3-hour long fantasy epic and with multiple different decision trees and choices, and you don't even know how the combat system works, make a combat encounter for us. Give us 2 set characters on a board with whatever the lowest level monster you think you're going to fight, and bring it just to see if your combat works. Put it in our hands, because if your combat's bad, chances are I'm not going to want to stick out the next 30 hours of your game, right? For you guys too, if your user interface is garbage, maybe that's what you should be working on instead of fretting over the same story line for another 15 hours when you don't have something to show me, right? That might sound kind of harsh, but I'm going to quote a really good friend of mine. His name is Sean Brannigan. He is one of the guys who helped start South by Southwest. If you guys are familiar with that conference, he was a teacher at Syracuse University. He's a close personal friend of mine. That's my girlfriend creeping in the background. I don't know what she's doing. But if he is famous for saying, he goes, ideas are like assholes. Everybody has one. And they're about as useful.
That's him?
He steals that quote. He likes to steal quotes, but that is what he does. But we've had that discussion before where he's like, I don't want to see your idea. Your idea does jack shit for me. Those are his words. He's from South Jersey. Can you tell?
Just a little.
Yeah. But that's what he says, though. And to be completely and totally honest, I've seen people laughed out of publishing meetings before because they're like, oh, I have an idea for this. Ideas don't do anything.
Hey, Kyle, you're
cutting out again.
Oh, sorry.
You're good.
Am I back?
Yep.
All right. We're just going to have to deal with that, I think. I don't know what's going on with Wi-Fi. But
it'd be like that
as I was
sometimes.
saying, yeah, but it do.
It really do.
But yeah, you want to have something to show to people. The thing that I always recommend for people to do is to put together an agile design kit. My agile design kit sits in a shoebox. I'm going to just tilt this really quick. You'll have to excuse the mess. Right over there. In that box, I have card sleeves with cards already in them. I have dice. I have meeples, which are tiny wooden figurines. I have Sharpies, poster boards, index cards. I can think of a game and I can make a prototype for it in about a day and a half. So from thought to conception to playtime, it's a day and a half to get it onto the table in people's hands. Famous success story about this. How many people have actually heard of Mario Rabbids or seen that famous GIF of the guy weeping over this game in E3?
Yeah.
Okay. This is actually one of the biggest success stories in agile development because this was presented to Shigeru Miyamoto not as a video game, but as a tabletop game. The design team for this actually prototyped this out on poster board. And so when Shigeru Miyamoto visited their office, they presented him with the game. They played it. They played what would actually become the first 2 levels of this game on poster board. And he was so impressed that he greenlit the project. No programming, nothing fancy, no sound effects. It was a firm grasp of game design, a firm grasp of what made things fun, and in Miyamoto's own words, it was an understanding of what makes Mario an enjoyable game that he saw in that paper prototype that let him greenlit that project. And everybody clowns on that guy who, by the way, the dude who's crying that game is the game's main producer. Everyone clowns on it. This is actually one of the best-selling games in that franchise.
It's also a really good game for.
It is really good.
I'm like, wow.
Mario and XCOM. Who knew it was an actual good idea? Apparently this dude did.
Made in heaven.
It is. But if he hadn't put that on paper, he would have had nothing to show. Now imagine let's rewind that, right? Let's imagine Miyamoto comes to that meeting. Oh, I have an idea for a game. He's already out the door. You want to have something to show people. Because if you can show it, it means the idea is there. All right. Now, tips for running a playtest session. I'm going to give Garrett the links to this so that you guys actually have access to this list. This is super helpful. I have done probably like 150 hours of playtesting this year alone, and the year is not over. I will probably do 150 more hours of playtesting by the time this is finished. You need to record audio or video of your playtest. This is super important. People are really nice. They are usually going to be nicer about your product or your game if you are there with them. So for example, I sent a kids game to a playtest group of mine in Virginia. I had them record audio of it. They were by like the third minute of that audio, I was like, oh crap. I need to actually like sharpen up how this rule book looks, because they were confused on setup. And if I'm there to explain that to them, that's not something I would catch, right? Again, people are really nice to you if you're in a room. There are things that you're going to miss if you're in a room with people, or if you're sending it out for what we call blind play testing, which is play testing if you're not present. It's super important to make sure that you get audio or video, because stuff like nonverbal cues, body language. For example, if somebody rolls 2 1s in your game and they wince because all of a sudden the game, which has been running great up to this point, and those 2 1s mean they don't get to do anything for that turn, that's a problem. But it's not a problem that you would catch if you hadn't gotten audio or video of that playtest session. Feedback sheets are really important too, just like simple questionnaires. What did you like? What did you not like? I like to use those if there's a specific thing that I'm working on. So for example, if I'm testing a combat system, my entire feedback sheet might only be about combat, and it might only be objective. Just circle. Make it as little work for the playtester as possible to get their thoughts directly to you. Because what you'll find is a lot of people will be like, oh, I would love to play test your game. Like I put a call out on Facebook for a couple people. I'm like, hey, now that we're all in quarantine, does anyone want to try a print and play game? I probably sent out 40 copies of my game. I've probably gotten feedback back from 3 groups. Because it's work for some people, or people just forget. If you make it as easy for them as possible, it's going to be easier for you. Put them into a group either on Steam or Discord. Steam, if you're playing Tabletop Simulator, is great. If you make a Facebook group, if you have a Discord chat, just give them a place where they can actually come together, so you can say, hey, what did you guys think about the game? What did you guys think about X? This is super important, because I forgot to do that for my last playtest session. I should have listened to my own self, and now I have to track down 30 people to see what they thought of a game, as opposed to there just being a place where they could put their feedback for me. So I made more work for myself. Don't do what I did, okay? Please take your own notes. Sean Brannigan, the same guy, I had a meeting with him where we talked about a game of mine that got published. And he was saying a bunch of stuff, and I was like, hey, do you mind sending me notes of what we talked about today? My experience in academia had been that professors do that. And he goes, no, I'm not going to do that. He goes, I think fast. Take your own notes. Seriously, bring a notebook with you. Oh, wait. Am I back?
I think so.
Awesome. So yeah, take your own notes. It's really, really important to do that, because no one else is going to take those notes but you, and there might be things that you notice. And try not to be present if you can at a play test. It's really important to see what people think about your game and how they experience your game without you there. Because that's going to be how most people will experience a game of yours if it comes out. Is you're not going to be present to hold their hand through stuff. So it's really important. That's called blind play testing. Very, very important. I'm going to gloss over the don'ts. So you guys can look at those at your leisure. But that's really important to learn how to run a playtest session. Pitching to a publisher. How many of you guys would love to see one of your games published at some point and make sweet, glorious money? So not to burst your bubble, usual royalties for a game designer, if you sell a game,
It's cutting out again.
Oh, thank you, Matt. Thank you, Will. Someone give me a thumbs up if I'm back.
It's like a second.
That's so odd. So for me, right, as a game designer of Happy Cactus, I'm expected to get 5% of what the game retails for. So it's a $10. It'll be a $10 game. I'm gonna get 50 cents on that game. Oh, cutting out again.
Mm-hmm. Think you're good.
All right. So I get about 5% of that game. Traditionally, if you are the person in a game design studio, your publisher get somebody who, like, let's say bankrolls your publishing deal, they get 30% of whatever you make. That's the traditional deal. It might be bigger or smaller depending on the nature of the game and whether or not you're a bigger name. If you've ever played Magic the Gathering, you guys know Richard Garfield, who designed that game. He makes about 8% of whatever it retails for, but he can afford, but that's because he has a name attached. Everybody else like me, the peasants like me, we make about 5. Couple things. Do your research. Figure out what the company specializes in, what the company's primary audience looks like. How many of you have played Gears of War? All right. How many of you have played Halo? Let's try that one. There we go. Most people have played Halo. How many of you would pitch Halo to Nintendo? I'm seeing a lot of very concerned faces. Right. You're not going to pitch Halo to Nintendo. It is not their primary audience. How many of you?
A Master Chief.
Yeah, it's a Master Chief, and then he jumps and then crushes a Covenant's head with a fire. Actually, that's great. I'm not gonna lie, I kind of want to play that game now. So what I'd like, so think about that, right? How many of you would pitch Animal Crossing to Bethesda? Will saying yes, maybe Will. If we could put it into the same engine that we've been using for the last 90 games, maybe they would.
Bro, just imagine nuclear fallout Animal Crossing. That'd be the greatest.
I mean, I only want it for a two-headed Isabel. If we can get a two-headed Isabel, I'm
Bethesda Creation Club, now for Animal Crossing.
Now for Skyrim Horizons. Just how many quests do I have to go on to get Tom Nook to leave my dungeon alone? My point is, know your audience, right? Don't pitch Halo to Nintendo. Don't pitch a kid's game to the guys that make Gears of War. And for the love of God, don't pitch Conker's Bad Fur Day to people, to like Scholastic Games, right? Know your audience.
That game is so good.
It's amazing. Conker's Bad Fur Day is great. It's an unmitigated classic, but you wouldn't pitch it to Scholastic Games.
Okay, not to get off topic, but I would argue, while fantastic that game may be, Microsoft kind of ruins its reputation by just doing nothing with the IP anymore.
It's always really interesting, and I'm unsure. There's some talk about, because they bought Rare for like $30 million in Rare payday, right? And they've just sat on all of their IPs and their staff for a while. I don't know why. Literally, I don't know why. So again, not to go too far off topic, but either the central management has no clue what to do with Rare, which might actually be the case, or Rare was only made so successful because Nintendo has a very great style of managing its third-party studios. And maybe their decision to break away from Nintendo, who was able to corral them into useful directions, backfired. I don't know. I just want Banjo-Kazooie.
Yeah, well, when the last time Microsoft even presented anything related to Conker's the IP?
Was it Live and Reloaded?
What?
It was
Live and Reloaded, the remastered version?
No, it was more recent than that.
It was when the Xbox One came out, I think.
Yes, it was a Kinect demo for the Xbox One. Remember Kinect? Because Microsoft wishes you didn't.
Do you guys remember Spy Toy for PS2? Was that before?
Oh my God!
Yeah. Okay. All right.
All right. Back on topic. Sorry.
I don't know. No, please. I mean, this is the good stuff, right? Because it makes a lot of sense to talk about these kind of things. Again, this is stuff that you'll get an idea for a game for. Maybe you'll make a game about not doing well, but about driving another game studio into the ground. I would play that game. There you go, guys. It's a free game design idea. If you take nothing else from this presentation, you get that. Present a sell sheet for your game. This is big in tabletop. I don't know if it's necessarily as big in video games, although I know some people have presented them before. It's literally just saying, this is our game's target audience. This is what you can expect. This is what our game brings to the table. And seriously, know what your game is going to bring to the table. If you are working with a company, for example, that wants this particular type of game, or if they're looking to branch out from their, let's say Nintendo wants to break away from their kid-friendly, family-friendly image, and they want a rated M Fire Emblem first-person shooter. Why? No, I mean, I would play it, as I'm Fire Emblem loving trash, but Grace is shaking her head like, yes, I would like to kill people as Ike in first person. I would too. Played Path of
Ike is
Radiance.
my favorite. Path of Radiance. I went to a whole thing on Path of Radiance, like a whole like convention panel just on Path of Radiance in the old games.
So I'm one of the few people that owns an original GameCube copy of Path of Radiance, which I have beaten 6 times.
Not
Oh
the
my
Wii
gosh.
version, the
So
GameCube.
I have the GameCube version of Path of Radiance. It is a sacred relic and will most likely be protected by my family till the day I die. But that's besides the point, right? Know what your game is going to do. A really great example of this, how many of you guys are familiar with THQ? They're no longer a studio anymore. But they were famous for making Saints Row, for making Metro, for making Darksiders, which is, it's a really sad loss. Oh, gosh. It's a really sad loss in terms of a publisher. But their original publication deal actually came because they had the idea to make Darksiders, and they actually pitched it to a publisher that up until that point had only made like video licensed tie-in games for Nickelodeon, which is not a target audience, right? But it so happened that at that time, that particular publisher wanted to break into a more adult space within the game industry, and THQ presented them with a really interesting product, and it just happened to work, right? That's going back to knowing your audience, but it's also going back to knowing what your game can do, and bring something to show. This is what we talk about, the MVP. For tabletop presentations, right, when I make a game to present to a publisher, it does not have to be finalized in terms of its visual style and its art. Most games that I have seen some of them just have no art, and it's just all gameplay and icons. But it has to work, right? The rules should be polished. The gameplay should be set. You can move themes around. You can shift the cosmetics of the game. As long as you have a strong core game to present that shows the publisher there's something there, that's really, really useful. All right. Now, so you're stuck. So this is for people who are actually working on their games, but this is something that's been helpful for me, how to get unstuck when you are stuck in a game design. There's a couple different strategies that I like to use, and I'll share them with you. The first one is to limit yourself. So we talked about Magic the Gathering. How many of you guys know that Mark Rosewater is the lead developer for Magic the Gathering, and has been the lead developer for Magic the Gathering for the last 25 years? This man has spent his entire adult life making Magic the Gathering. He is literally the guy who's in charge of all of it. And the thing that he has talked about all the time, he has a phenomenal GDC talk called 50 Sets, 50 Lessons, all about making Magic. I highly encourage you to go out and watch it. It's a great talk. But he talks about one of the strategies that they have used is to put constraints on yourself, right? For example, let's make a dice rolling game where if you roll a 4, you instantly die. What does that game look like? Some of you are like, that's terrible. And like I saw Will like, could I do something with that? Maybe you could, right? A card game where you have to play your opponent's hand, but your opponent has to play yours. A real-time game where you can only use one finger and one arm to manipulate all of the pieces. What does that look like, right? That is infinitely more interesting, I think, as a designer, than, let's say, make me another open-world, third-person strategy RPG. Boy, there's a reason that Skyrim succeeded in Assassin's Creed. Assassin's Creed Odyssey was panned. One of them did a great job. One of them was copying another formula. Now, if you said, give me an Assassin's Creed game where you're a blind assassin, and you do like echolocation to do all of your stealth kills, suddenly I'm interested.
This
Super hot.
This
Was
is
it-
probably
was
a dumb question, but have you ever heard of Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Alex. I am glad you brought that up. It's a phenomenal version of that, phenomenal idea of that. Super hot is another great one. What if moving is dangerous? The most essential thing you do in games, movement. What if we make it really scary and bad for you? The one that I always like to talk about is Darkest Dungeon, which I've included a little snippet right there. Grace, I love it. I love it.
We talked to the developer for Darkest Dungeon, the game designer for
Tyler Sigmund?
last year. Yeah. He was
Yes.
really cool.
Yep, super cool guy. Another fun fact about the bleed over between tabletop and video games. Tyler Sigmund is one of the first people to do print and play games that you buy. That was how he got started when he was an engineer at Lockheed and Martin, and not actually a game designer. He would make games that you would print off because he didn't know how to computer program at that point. But Darkest Dungeon succeeds because they take the whole adventure formula and they say, what if you can't use all of your heroes at any given moment because one of them is PTSD, or all of them have PTSD, or all of them could die instantly of a heart attack at any point. That game is very tense and very stressful. I encourage you to play it at some point. It's a really great example of what limits can do to make a game interesting, right? So limit yourself. Personally, right now, I'm working on a game for a upcoming publication. How many of you guys are familiar with the concept of a legacy game? How many of you play? All right, Alex is saying yes. Good. Grace saying yes. Logan's kind of nodding his head. So like Risk Legacy or Gloomhaven are really big examples within that space, or Pandemic Legacy. The challenge was for us to make a legacy game with 18 cards.
Huh.
Yes. That is the game that I'm working on right now, is a legacy game that you can play with 18 cards. It has been one of the most fun projects I've worked on. Because it's like you have to break down how much can I afford? What can I afford to do with these cards? What does my design space look like? I've had more fun working on this project than projects where I've had infinite freedom. And you'll find that if you put those limits on yourself, what you come up with is a lot of times maybe not necessarily as mainstream marketable, but it's a lot more interesting. You'll learn a lot about yourself, the type of games that you want to make in your own design style if you put limits on what you're going to do. I highly encourage you to do it at least once with a project that you're working on. Game jams, Logan, I know you said that you'd been to a couple of those, are famous for doing that. What does a game look like if we, set it where everyone is a kitten that has no combat abilities? Or what if the whole game is selling Girl Scout cookies to people that don't like cookies? There are different interesting limits that you can put on yourself. All right, find your niche. So find something that interests you that nobody else does. I'm going to go back again because I keep accidentally clicking. The picture that I have included is for a game called Dogs in the Vineyard. It was an award-winning role-playing game about Mormons. It is one of Will, your eyes are just like, what? You can do that? Yes. So this game was actually made by a Mormon. The idea is there is a fictional United States, and the territory of Utah is run entirely by Mormons. Their law service are called dogs, which are essentially Mormon youths that when they turn 18 are given a badge, a gun, one of those coats, and a Bible, and told to go rid the land of corruption, which works about as well as you might think. It is one of the most exciting role-playing games I've ever played. The combat system plays like poker, where you and the game master are raising, calling, checking, or folding for combat, which is wild. It's super cool. I see Logan and Grace geeking out. Yeah, Alex is
I
like,
love
what?
this.
Oh my God.
It's just, at first you said it was made by a Mormon, and I was like, oh, well, that's probably not as funny as if it hadn't been. And now the fact that this is made by a Mormon is even more interesting.
It's incredible. It's so good. It's one of the most, it has the most like story-rich combat system I've ever played. A lot of times you go into town and then wind up ridding the town of manifestations of the 7 deadly sins. It is a super wild rush. And this Mormon, the guy who wrote it, would bring it to like Mormon conventions or smaller game shows because he was like, there's not a really cool game that's like centered around like our faith. And kudos to him because he takes a neutral look at his own faith and what it would look like in this fantasy US setting, because some of the Mormons in the book are great and some of the Mormons in the book are directly responsible for a bunch of atrocities. And it's a really cool juxtaposition, but it's something that he brought to the table with his own unique sensibilities, and it made for a game that won a ton of awards. And it also just happens to be like, it slaps, if we're being completely honest. It's really good. That's another one. Bird watching. How many of you like to bird watch or think that would make a really interesting game? Nobody? How many of you
Considering you're bringing it up.
Right. How many of you have heard of a game called Wingspan? There's a board game called Wingspan. It is the best-selling game of the last 2 years. It is made by a woman who is an ornithologist by trade. If you're familiar with the board game Scythe or Viticulture, Stonemaier Games, they snapped that up immediately. That is the only game they made from last year that anyone talks about. And Jamie Stegmaier, who owns the company and designs Scythe and Viticulture, had nothing to do with it. This is an example from Unpub. I played a push your luck dice rolling game about ultimate frisbee called The Huck. The guy that made it was a former professional ultimate frisbee player. God, that's the most fun I've had with a push your luck dice rolling game in like probably 5 years, 6 years, ever. Most likely. Like Yahtzee can get the heck out of here as far as I'm concerned. The game was great. Or Geese, Untitled Goose Game. Who thought that was going to be like the smash hit of the year? But imagine, Will, I walk up to you and go, hey, listen to me. I have a game where you're a goose who is also a bastard.
Let's say, tell me more.
Right. But that's not something that the regular layperson would think to themselves and go, man, I would love to make a game about a goose.
I mean, can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Would you say the same thing for, this might be off topic, but I said the same thing for Goat Simulator.
Absolutely.
When that was a free game on PlayStation Plus, I was just like, "Ooh, this is like,
yep,
what is this?" And like 5 minutes later, I'm just laughing my ass off because it's so absurd, and it's just like, well, it's like you said, it's like from the surface level, it's just like, why would I ever want to play it as a goat? To why have I never played as a goat before?
Exactly. Yeah, Alex.
This is more just personal curiosity. Have you ever gotten an elevator pitch?
Have I ever gotten an elevator pitch?
Yeah.
So because I'm not a publisher, no. But
Okay.
We pitch each other all the time. Like the game designers and I, like we pitch each other all the time. Because what you want, Alex, are people to be like, God, your pitch sounds like hot garbage. Or wow, your pitch sounds like something I would immediately shell out money to play.
Mm-hmm.
So I have two of my friends. They run a very, very small publishing studio called Silver Clutch Games out in Philly. They have a game called Heavy Armor, I believe the name of it is. But they were like, what if you could just do what if the whole game was a highlight reel from an anime mech battle? And I was like, tell me more. I would like to play through the better part of Gundam, right? Like that sounds amazing. Episodes 1 through 7 of Darling in the Franxx before it got weird? Yes, 100%. Right? But yeah, like, and you'll listen to pitches too. Like, and I've gotten some terrible pitches too. We can talk about that if you want to. I can talk about that at length for the Q&A. But like, I have played some god awful games, and I have heard some terrible pitches. I will say, Alex, I think the big thing that separates a good pitch from a pitch.
You're cutting out again.
Oh, sorry. My back.
Every time you say like, yeah, sorry, that's when it gets perfect again. It's
awesome.
very strange.
Right. I have power, I guess. My midichlorians are high. I'll just rewind. I think the thing that separates a good pitch from a bad pitch is focus. Mm-hmm. I think you can tell a good game from a bad game if it takes them 9 paragraphs to explain it, as opposed to 3 sentences. Case in point, if you're like, oh, it's a game where you're scavenging for supplies in New York and there are zombies, but also resource management and limited backpack space, and I am already asleep. As opposed to, there is a game where you are a goat that also has superpowers. I'm there, man. Let's go. Strap me up with the goat. That's exactly what I want. Right. So, Alex, I will say focus, I think, is really, really important.
Okay.
When you're pitching a game too. So if you have an idea, if you can pitch it to me in 3 sentences or less, you're in a great place. Because it shows that you understand that somebody's time is important, the person that you're pitching to. It shows that you understand your product enough to break it down to its most important elements. And it shows that you understand what this game is about at its center. Focus is really important. Like Dogs in the Vineyard, what if you are a Mormon lawman who is assigned to root out evil and corruption? What does that look like? The Huck, what if you are in a push your luck dice game revolving around Ultimate Frisbee? Wingspan, build an incredible point scoring engine of doom by watching birds.
Can you give me your 3-sentence pitch for Catan?
For my 3-sentence pitch for Catan? Absolutely. Gather resources, stab your buddy, achieve victory. You can do it in 3 words.
All right.
And that is what Catan is ultimately.
Yeah.
Also, if anyone wants to fall down the rabbit hole of professional Catan, there's a YouTube channel called Die Lighted, and he's like the number 103rd ranked Catan player on the planet. I find it so fast. He's like, yes, and I'll put my road extending up so that way I get the double ore slot in the 6th turn. I'm like, dude, I just have sheep. Like, Um,
I
But yeah.
mean, I can't really talk because I play competitive Pokemon Go. So
I mean, I, I laugh because my mom plays Pokemon Go, which is hysterical because she's an ex-Penn State like majorette,
mhm.
and so she shows up with like a little pink workout tank top, and she was max level like 2 years ago.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's honestly the weirdest part is like
Yeah,
it kind of woke me up to realizing like when I think of the other people that play video games, I think of like me. I think of people my age, probably male, right? And then, I'll spend a day like doing Pokemon raids with like, this 65-year-old woman and just like we'll have a great time,
Yeah.
and talk about all kinds of stuff.
yeah. Oh,
Crazy.
seriously, I have learned to dread the 45-year-old suburban housewife Pokemon Go player. They are a force of nature as far as I'm concerned.
They really are.
They will tear you apart without like blood in the water, man. They're like sharks.
Yeah.
There's no mercy there whatsoever. I love them. They're great. But yeah, then you can find that too, Alex. I think that's a really interesting thought experiment when you just asked me to do for Catan. If you look at like the classic games from your childhood, you could probably boil those games down to 3 sentences.
Mhm.
Almost all of them universally. Monopoly, amass a fortune, build businesses, crush your enemies.
Connect
Or-
4. Connect 4.
Connect 4 is one of my favorite games for that very example.
Grace, you know that was good. Don't lie.
It's not bad. All right, and then we're gonna do one more practical thing, and then we'll go to our
Back to
Q&A
you,
session because I feel like you guys have a lot of good questions. I mean, you're already asking a ton of good ones already, so that's great. But some helpful links. If you're like me, putting together prototypes is really difficult. I wanted to put together a bunch of resources I thought could be. These.
Cutting out again.
Yeah. All right, perfect. So Garrett's going to have access to these so you guys can take a look at them, peruse them at your leisure, but they've all been very helpful for me in some way, shape, or form. Twine, have you guys ever heard of Twine?
I've never heard of it, but I wish I did because I love Choose Your Own Adventure.
It is super simple, Grace. So there's very little programming involved. You click on a story bubble, write your story, their bubble that connects directly to that. I have my students use it, and it's great. And we actually, so I was interviewing for a position with Fantasy Flight Games. If you guys know those guys, they do the Star Wars and a lot of the Cthulhu and the Game of Thrones role-playing games.
Cutting out.
Oh.
It's slowly getting worse, I think.
It's all right. We're nearing
You're good.
the end anyway. Eventually, someone else will be doing more talking than me. So Twine is great. GIMP, which is the most unfortunately named software program I think I've ever encountered, but it is a free alternative to Photoshop. Its tools are almost as expansive as Photoshop's. So if you're looking to learn a lot of good visual, like a lot of strong visual stuff, that's one that I recommend a lot. How many of you guys have been to GDC, watched a GDC talk? All right. You need to watch some GDC talks. Mark Rosewater's 50 Lessons in 50 Years is great. Tyler Sigmund's Postmortem on Darkest Dungeon.
Cutting out.
As soon as I mentioned Doom, I cut out.
Good now.
Coincidence? I think not. How many of you guys are Doom fans? How many people have played Doom or Doom Eternal?
I've played a demo of Doom and now I want to get it, but it's so hard. Like just right now, like I just need to get some income first, and then I'll think about.
Well,
I played the classic.
In the meantime, guys, if you're interested in Mick Gordon is the composer for Doom's entire metal soundtrack. He does an amazing GDC talk about what it takes to push past your own artistic limits. I really find that one enjoyable. There's a postmortem on Diablo 2, which was really fascinating. But seriously, if you haven't yet, like these are people who are in many cases luminaries in our industry. You can learn a lot by listening to them. I included an example of what a great sell sheet looks like as well. I know we touched on those as well. Flux is a very simple card game. It sells very well. I think I think it moves like 70,000 copies a year, something ridiculous like that. But that's a sell sheet of what that looks like. Now, if you're looking for visuals, I included 2 different links. There is a free clip art library It's traditionally used by, I guess, like teachers and women making church bulletins. But all of the clip art is free. So if you're looking for visual placeholders for a prototype, whether that's a digital game or a tabletop game, all of it's free for personal use, which means you can download it at your leisure. The photos link that I included is my favorite part. So the Library of Congress actually makes available a ton of different visual resources. I don't know how many of you guys are fans of BioShock or BioShock Infinite. There is an entire category of old propaganda posters, as well as pictures of the frontier. There's like blueprints of old houses. There's a lot of really interesting stuff. And again, that's all free in high resolution downloads. If you ever want images for some of your prototypes, I would highly encourage you look through some of those. There's some really cool stuff there. And then if you're curious about tabletop design, there's a board game business podcast. I've included a link to one of those episodes on how to play test your game, which I think was an incredibly helpful episode. It's a an off branch of Dice Tower, which is a board game review show. That's interesting, but it's not super helpful for our purposes. But the board game business one is, because it is all fun and games, but there's a lot of business that goes along with it. So kind of important to make sure that you note that as well. All of these resources are free. All of these resources are readily available, but it's all stuff that I've had to sort of discover over my time working. I wanted you guys to have access to it. So again, if for nothing else, you'll have a concrete toolbox of stuff that you can use, maybe start making your own designs. So with that done, that is the end of our presentation. I'm going to stop sharing, and hopefully that will alleviate some of our, thank you, everyone. I appreciate that. We are going to open up the floor for Q&A. At this point, there is nothing off the table that I'm willing to discuss. If you want to talk about pitching, you want to talk about like how to get in, practical stuff. If I have an answer, I will give it to you, and if I don't have an answer, I'll tell you, because as much as I look like Professor X, I am not all-knowing. So we'll open it up. Who's got a question? Yes, Grace.
Yes, awesome. So I have a question about game design and kind of the remote development, since we're in this, remote environment now.
Yeah.
What is board game design like in a remote environment?
It is a lot of print and play. That's actually become, I'm very fortunate in that that's a big thing now, more so than it was 2 years ago. People are much more willing to download a PDF and print it off and try it on their own, especially now more than it's ever been. Board Game Geek, which is a site that is the aggregate reviewer of all board games. It houses the top 100 games of all time list. They hold a solo print and play design contest every year. And that has been running pretty much since, I think, 2016, 2015. I'm going to get fact checked and proved wrong. That's okay. But in the last couple of years, it's a lot better. Tabletop Simulator also exists as something on Steam, and a lot of people are doing that now as well. How do you guys know Gloomhaven? Does everyone know Gloomhaven, or at least has heard of Gloomhaven? So Frosthaven, which is the highly anticipated sequel, just kickstarted to the tune of like $15 million. And the first 3 missions in Frosthaven are already available to play for free on Tabletop Simulator. So it definitely doesn't look as bleak as I thought it was going to look. But I will say, this is something that I know from working with some of the bigger retailers and some of the bigger publishers. This crisis is probably going to wipe out a lot of the smaller mid-tier publishers. And a lot of the smaller shops are going to be hit pretty hard. A lot of the smaller distributors are going to be hit pretty hard. What that landscape looks like moving forward is anybody's guess. My guess is it's going to be a lot smaller and a lot more focused. I don't think that the industry is going to die as a result of this. I do think that the weak are going to kind of get culled a little bit. So like if you're a company that doesn't have your finances right, or if you don't really have strong releases, or if you're dependent on the next paycheck coming in, I think that's going to change some things. So we'll see what that looks like for designers like me and for smaller publishers. But for the most part, I think the bigger ones are still going to be in play. We'll see. But I think it's going to look different. And I think Kickstarter is going to become a much bigger player as well in this landscape. If you can't go out to your brick and mortar store to go actually get a game or go support people, I think Kickstarter is going to be, Kickstarter is already a huge force in our industry. It's probably poised to become an even bigger one. We'll see. All right.
Thank you. That was awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right, Will.
So from my understanding, the process to getting a game published versus the design stages is sort of be a bit stressful
Yeah.
to say the least. Do you have any sort of like thoughts on that? Like your own experiences with
Sure.
actually like getting something published and what you had to go through?
Absolutely. So initially, I went through about 3 years of nothing but frustration. I will tell you that right now. Cold call, it really isn't as much as people are like, yeah, put yourself out there. Like, let's be real here for a second. Just blindly doing that is not very effective. And it was also really, if we're being honest, really disheartening for me. So my publishing deal actually got inked because I built Happy Cactus. I had played it at a previous show with some of my friends, some of my coworkers. I brought it to Gen Con last year. And his name is John Stevens. He's the CEO of games, but he's also our retail liaison for Yellow Games. We were having a game night in the hotel. He came in as we were playing. He goes, no. Oh,
You're cutting out a bit.
all right. We'll wait. Freeze.
We heard John Stevens.
All right. Good. Thank you for. Am I back?
Yep.
Awesome. So John Stevens, who's our retail liaison, showed up to that game night and didn't want to play, just sat. 20 minutes into the night, he goes, hey, just to let you know, I really like, I'm like, what are you texting about? And he goes, oh, I'm texting the publisher just want to meet about your game. I'll let you know tomorrow. And it, right, because it was a game that he liked.
You seem to be cutting out again, at least.
Oh my gosh, this is killing me. So I would never have been in a position to do that, right? Unless I had, I'd worked with her and he knew that I was a good person, then was in a place where he wanted to look at a game that I'd made. And so Atlas Games, who originally looked at Happy Cactus, they make games. And a couple of the What?
You're cutting out again.
We
Oh
heard Atlas
man,
Games. Sorry.
Yeah.
that's okay. It's okay.
I'm trying to see if it'll just like go away after a second. So.
Yeah.
Maybe if I close some of my tabs. I don't know what's going on with our bandwidth here because usually our internet's great. So
The video has
Weird
been
'cause you,
fine,
like,
but the
kinda-
audio is kind of just been
so weird. Let me
Yeah.
I'm gonna mute myself. All right, and I'm back. Is that better?
Yep.
Sweet. So I would never have been in that position if I hadn't gotten to know him. The thing I would say is I think I would start building those relationships small. That's how it's worked for me. Like, it's really weird to know that, like, in my phone right now, I could text Justin DeWitt from Fireside Games, who's the guy that made Castle Panic, and be like, hey, do you want to get a beer next time we're in town? It's weird to know that I could walk, like, I could walk like down the hall in my hotel room and talk to the CEO of Yellow, who's a close personal friend now. Those relationships happened because I worked really hard and I put myself in a position to build them. That's one way that you can go about doing that. The other way that you can go about doing that is, am I good still?
Yep, still good.
So everyone else froze that time, but not me. Interesting. So the other thing that you can do is you could build a product that really excites people. And what that means is you're going to have to actually do a lot of the groundwork yourself. You're going to have to be the one that wears all of those hats. You'll have to be a business person, a networking person, the designer, the visual representative, the marketer, right? You'll have to do all of those things on your own. It's a lot of work, but if you build a quality product, it could pay dividends. Gloomhaven, I don't know if you guys know this or not, Isaac Childress, the guy that made Gloomhaven is his first game.
Ever? Or published?
Ever. I mean, probably not ever, Alex. He's probably made a couple ones like by himself, but that's the first game that he's ever put on Kickstarter. It's the first game that he's ever gotten published, the first game he's attempted to get published. Mm-hmm. It is the first game that Cephalofair Games, which is his studio, has made. And the game is the #1 game of all time on Board Game Geek for a reason, right? If you build a quality product, it's going to show. But Will, if you ever read his blog, you'll know that he had to slog through something like 2,500 emails like every week when shipping and distribution didn't work for that game by himself because they didn't have people yet working for him. There's a lot of work to be established there, but if you make a quality product, it shows. So there's not really a set avenue for success. Kickstarter and like Indiegogo has made it so that a lot of people are opened up to what could be successful. But I think that the most, at least for me, who has like another full-time career and a family and things that I like doing outside of games, for me, it was getting to know people and wanting to have other people do the publishing side of things, because it was something that, because I had a Kickstarter that failed when I was in college, and I was like, it showed me that I'm like, this is not the road to success that I want to take, right? That doesn't mean that it doesn't work for everybody. And again, what you'll find is that things are going to work for other people. You could do what Phil Fish and Edmund McMillian did when they made their indie games and just hit a bunch of conventions and build up a lot of interest and release a game and see where it goes. There's a number of different avenues. There's actually a GDC talk I might suggest for you, Will, and it's called "You Don't Need an Effing Publisher." The guys who give that talk are Devolver Digital, who made Hotline Miami and a number of other games that, Enter the Gungeon, a lot of really strong indie games. But yeah, it's called "You Don't Need an Effing Publisher," and it's a little bit about the atypical routes to success that some people can take. It's highly beneficial, I think, for you. It'd be a good one. But like I said, it's different for everybody, but networking can't help, and networking can never hurt. Because I know that if I go to Seattle, I can stay on my friend Tiff's couch, and she works for Haba. And I know if I wind up in the Midwest, I can go to Muncie, Indiana, and see my friend who is the main demo team leader for Tabletoppers that makes like luxury game top stuff. I know if I go down to Colorado, I can see John Stevens and I can crash on his couch at his game store. Like, even if it doesn't get a game published, you're almost never going to be in a worse position from networking and from meeting those people. That'd be my recommendation. And you're doing a good job of it now because you're in this game club, which is a step that a lot of people don't take. They're like, I could just sit and be a hermit and make my games. And it doesn't work. You got to get to know people. So, which is why I left video game design, because nobody wanted to talk to each other. I was like, I'm never going to survive here. So, yeah, that's a great question, though. All right. Any other questions?
How many ideas have you? Oh, I think somebody talked before me.
I just said not at the moment.
All right.
How many ideas have you? Oh, continue.
No, I was going to say, so Alex, I know you had mentioned about like, have I ever gotten a pitch for a game? I can tell you the worst pitch that I've ever gotten was at Unpub. And I think, Garrett, I think you played this game. Do you remember Gravesend?
Oh, yeah.
Garrett said, oh no.
Yeah. Yep. So there is a guy who is pitching a legacy style game where you are part of a neighborhood in New York called Gravesend, which is in Brooklyn, during a zombie apocalypse. He had the sweet like topographic map of the entire city section with all the buildings. It was accurate, which was crazy. And it was really fun, but like this was one of those ones like, yeah, like there's resource management, but also permadeath, but also legacy goals, but also was a list of features about like 7 paragraphs wide, which already I'm like, dude, if it takes me 5 minutes to tell me what the game is about before we even start playing, I'm a little worried before like of your pitch. And then we played it and it was really terrible up until like there was this moment where, because all the characters are underpowered, no one can bring anything. The combat system was bad. And then there was a moment where we're like, oh, cool. So we're in a house. There are zombies in the house, and the zombies and the raiders, who are all heavily armored, start fighting each other. And at that moment, I was like, oh, this is super cool. We're all supposed to be really terrible and underpowered so that we can trick the more powerful people into fighting each other. That's a really interesting game concept. And then they all turned and killed us instead of fighting each other, despite the fact that we made no noise and had no guns. And he goes, like, the guy's like, you just don't understand how to play. And we're like, you don't understand what is good about your game. At which point we made up an excuse and we left. It was to this day, I wouldn't play that. I would not play that one again at all. The part where you got to rip up the cards was great because it meant that those cards stopped existing and that game stopped existing for a brief moment. That was probably the best part. I was like, you can make a bad game. I am okay with making bad games, but for the love of all that's good and holy, if you keep getting the same feedback from people about your game, for the love of all that is good, listen to them. There is a folder on my desktop called the Shadow Realm, and that is where the prototypes that none of my playtest group want to play again wind up. Because it's not worth wasting your time on those games anymore. No matter how cool it sounds or how great it is, your energy, and you only have so much energy and so much time. And that guy is probably going to spend another 2 to 3 years to make that game, only to discover it's hot dumpster juice. Or worse, he'll get it kickstarted and it will be god awful, and then he'll have to deal with the career fallout of that. But listen to that's the worst. That's the worst game pitch and worst game playtest experience I've ever had. It was terrible because he was angry with us for telling him the game was bad when it was very clearly bad. There are some people who get really attached to a project. They're like, this is my child and my infant, and I will love it and protect it forever. And that's not what a game is. Have a kid if you want that experience, but don't. That's not a game.
If you want to spend money, time, and never give that up.
Yeah, exactly. That's what a child is for.
Yeah.
Right? Because you can at least sculpt that into someone who's great. But if a game is bad, it doesn't grow on its own. So pitch it if it's bad. That's what I'm saying. All right, Garrett. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. You had a question though.
How do you know that your game is not great?
I can let me counter that. How do I know if a game is great?
How do I know it's worth the time investment? I experienced this, as you know, I experienced this senior year of high school when I designed that card game, and I was like,
Signor.
Oh, this game's bad.
Signor, yeah, I remember Signor. I played that one.
Yeah.
It wasn't terrible though. You were leaps and ahead of Gravesend, buddy. I actually could play your game more than once. I couldn't get through one session of Gravesend. So how do you know if a game is good? If your playtest group asks to play it again without being prompted.
Okay.
That is the best advice I can give you. If you get done with your first run of a game and your playtest group goes, cool, can we try it a second time? You're on to something. I'm not saying it's perfect because I don't think any game is perfect on the first playtest. But if they ask to play it a second time or a third time, then you've probably got something that you should devote your time and your energy into. Happy Cactus was one of the first games that I had built and I had built a couple games that were what I would consider solid, but nothing that I think could have gotten published in a landscape that's crowded with solid games already. Happy Cactus was the first game that I played it with my playtest group, and literally across the board, everyone's like, yo, could we play it again? And then we played it 7 more times. And then when I brought it to a different playtest group at Gen Con, we played it 9 times in a row.
That was my experience with Coup. Is the first time I played that, I finished the game, and then I was just I really I need to play that again right now.
Yep. Coup is one of those games, Alex, that makes me really angry because I look at it and I was like, God, this is so stupidly good. How did you think of this?
It's 40%, or it's 20%. You're angry because you just got eliminated. 20% you're angry because you didn't come up with it.
Yeah.
And then 60% angry because you have to leave and you can't play anymore.
Yep, 100%. And that's my only gripe about Coup is that the player elimination rules suck. There's got to be a version of Coup somewhere where if you're eliminated, you can do something to just make other people's lives miserable throughout the game.
As ghosts.
Yeah, as ghosts. Yeah, as ghosts are maybe you're rumor mongering among the other political elite or whatever.
You know what would be interesting is if there was a version of Coup where when people died, they faked their death and they now had different abilities that you have to execute from behind the scenes.
And there's a 3-sentence pitch that I would play. It's like Coup, but dying is actually a good thing. Mm-hmm. It's like Coup, but death is part of your plan to win. I would love a game about faking your death and coming back from the quote unquote the grave. to achieve victory. That sounds awesome to me. Like, I'd play that game. But yeah, Coup is a great example. And I probably should have, maybe I'll add it to, if we do this presentation a second time, I'll make a list of them. But there's a number of games that I would recommend that you play as game designers, because they really break down some super, super interesting stuff or some solid stuff in terms of like actual game design. I'm a big fan of, if you can teach me this game in 2 minutes and I can play it for 2 years and not break it, which is like the hardest thing to do in game design. But man, there's a lot of great games. Like Concordia is probably one of the best games I've ever played from a game design perspective, because everyone starts with the same moves, and by the end of the game, you all have different abilities. Like what you can do on your turn and what someone else can do on their turn looks completely different, but not because of randomness, because of what you have decided to do throughout the game. It's really excellent. Shobu from Smirk and Dagger is another great one where there's nothing but 4 boards, a piece of rope, and like I think 16 rocks. And that game feels like chess to me, where there's just an infinite amount of complexity within the individual decision points. So, but yeah, I mean, that's another thing too, I think. Garrett, to go back to your point though, I think the other thing, probably the best advice I've gotten from another designer on how you know a game is good is when it encourages your players to make tough choices. If you make a game where someone is making a choice each round, a decision each turn, and they feel like it's a difficult decision, you've made something interesting.
Like choosing what to build in Civ, for example.
Choosing what to build in Civ is a great example. Absolutely. Or choosing what to do in Civ.
Yeah.
Do I risk moving my one? I've only played up to Civ 5, so forgive me if you're a Civ 6.
I haven't played Civ 6.
Yeah, so like maybe it's like, do I move my worker over here to rebuild this, or do I work on the road that's going to give me the commerce bonus because I've invested in market? Should I have invested in the marketing economy, or should I have gone all in on culture? Those are the individual decision points that really matter. And that's what I love. Like if you make something that has an intriguing decision point to it, or encourages you to do something different with those decisions, I think you've made something interesting. But super solid as well. All right. Any other questions? I tried to be as meticulous as possible with that presentation, but now's the time to ask them, because I 3 years of slogging through it, man, you learned some stuff.
That was probably the best presentation I've gotten on game design.
For sure.
Yeah, because I mean we have had presenters before, but I think your experience is so close to what we are going to experience going into the field, or the stuff that you have experienced are very valuable to us, because some people that we've talked to, they're just so high up the food chain now that it's hard to relate. But I just feel like your experience is really great for us.
And to be honest, I'm not too far removed from where you guys are. Like, I mean, I have another career, obviously, but like I said, game design's a tough field to break into, because everybody wants to do it, and everybody thinks they can do it, and neither of those are true. Which is a sad thing, and you'll figure it out as you go. But I mean, it really is a lot of relationship building, and it really is a lot of trial and error. But you'll find out fairly quickly if this is something that you want to continue doing. It's something that, like, the deeper and deeper I've gotten into it, the more I've fallen in love with it. I will probably do this until I am old and gray, and I'll probably still do it even then. Like Stephen Hawking style, if I can't pick up a dice or whatever, because I enjoy it a lot. Like it's become something that I enjoy and I look forward to every year. And this is something that, again, like we touched on this in the beginning, we're introducing ourselves, but Stefan, who's my boss, when he was a low-level marketing exec at Nintendo, no one would give him the time of day, so he made some cold calls and got a bunch of TVs sent to him, I think from like HTC or whatever, loaded them all into the company's panel van and drove them down to a conference and did like a cross-promotional thing without his boss even knowing. And he got helped out by their marketing people who sent him a couple TVs and waived the fee so that he could go to the convention, didn't have to pay the booth fee for it because he was attached to the Nintendo brand. That decision helped pave the way for him to do a lot of other stuff. Kurt Cover from Smirk and Dagger Games, who makes Shobu and makes a couple other ones. His story was that he had a card game idea. He went to a small local convention. He went to like a Kinko's, which is like a bougie Staples. They're all out of business now. But like he went to that. He took the paper cutter. He made paper cardstock versions of his prototype, put them in like the printer paper boxes, and sold them at $15 a pop at the first convention that he was ever at. And then he sold enough of those copies that he went home and was like, flew to his wife and was like, look, I sold I brought 600 copies of this game. I sold 600 copies. And they put out a second mortgage on their house so that he could afford to start a business. Like all of the people that I know that are still in this industry are not the people that were like waltzed out of college into a job like this. They're people like you guys and like me who were really passionate about game design, clawed their way into a position and just kept clawing because it was something that they loved doing. The money is not great. I'm going to be completely and totally honest with you guys right now. If you're in this for the money, if you think you're going to be a millionaire or a billionaire, there are far more failure stories than there are success stories. Like the Edmund McMillions of the world, the Phil Fishes of the world, the Jonathan Blows of the world, the guys that make $30 million on a video game. There are few and far between. But there is a way that you can make a comfortable, reasonable living doing what you love doing in this industry. And I think that's a pretty aspirational goal in and of itself. I don't think if you're in this to make millions, you're in the wrong spot. Like any job or any industry, this is something that you're going to be defined by the passion that you have for it. And you'll figure out very quickly if you're one of those people that just doesn't. That's kind of a harsh truth, but like I know people like, I'm going to do this. And then I don't see them anymore because it wasn't what they expected, or it was too hard, or they didn't like the hours or whatever. And I'll be the first one to admit too, I'm very fortunate to work for the company that I work for, to work for the people that I work for. They're one of the best companies that I've ever worked for, period, in any industry. And that starts with management. I know some people who work in our industry that are not very happy with their management. So your mileage may vary, but hopefully at the very least, you guys have all been given some tools to hopefully succeed. Because the more game designers there are, the better.
Heck yeah.
I'm game loving trash, and I love it. Like the more ideas you've got, the better. Like I love seeing what people have to share, because you never know who's going to come up with an absolute banger. One of the guys at our local playtest group made a roll and write math game. So it's like Yahtzee, but with math. And then if you got certain combinations of numbers and equations, you got to unlock powers. And then those powers made your score go up in different ways. And if you told me that I hate dice games and I hate math, and if you told me I would want to play a dice rolling math game a second time and a third time and a fifth time, then I would have told you were nuts, but I loved it. Kind of want to play it now. Like just
I have a question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Drop my phone. What is your favorite game that you've made? Not only from you said you focus a lot on educational games, right?
Yeah. Yep.
What is your favorite game that you've made in the sense of not only like, wow, I think this is like the gameplay of this is very interesting, but you also think like, wow, this like offers something educationally to the people who play it and provides value?
So that's a loaded question. So the favorite game that I've made thus far is Happy Cactus, because it's the one that's going to get published. Yeah. And that sounds like a pretty cop-out answer, but that's what it is.
That's fair.
But it's not my favorite educational game. I made two games that stick out to me. One of them was called Ahead of the Curve, which is all about the French Revolution and about guillotining people to death, which was fun. But it was one of those games where if you try and explain the French Revolution to a bunch of lacrosse players in college, they get it, but like they don't understand why it's that bad. So in this game, right, there's a spy master. So it's a lot like Mafia, except the spy master is trying to get people killed, and everyone's kind of aware that everyone else is their enemy to begin with. And so, of course, there's an element where, as a group, you democratically elect a number of people to get essentially guillotined, and then you bring that person into the center, and then they have to explain why you shouldn't guillotine them. And so I had a student turn around and be like, dude, this is really effed up. Why are you making people beg for their lives in class? At which point I'm like, yeah, it's messed up until you realize that people did this for real, dude. And he goes, oh, and you could like see, it was like watching the cognitive dissonance just like crack in his head where he was like, oh, this was real. This really happened. And so there's a really strong potential, I think, for games to teach people about like what it feels like to be in a time period, to experience something. There's a really interesting game. Oh my God, I'm blanking on it. Oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the name of it. I'll send it to Garrett to talk about it. But there's a game where everyone in it is a hospice worker. It's a board game. You are all a hospice worker, and you're caring for a terminally ill man. And the goal of this game is to keep this guy alive and comfortable enough that he can finally relay his life story to you. And in relaying his life story, he gets a measure of peace. You can't save him. He is going to die at the end of this game. You can't fix the mistakes that he's made, and he has made a lot of mistakes. He's like an alcoholic, and like he's had a really strained relationship with the women in his life. You can't go back in time and fix those mistakes. All you can do is keep this guy alive enough to bear witness to what he's done, and to the life that he's led. And that's a really powerful emotional experience for a lot of people that play it. For me in particular too, because like my grandparents are both still alive, but they're both getting older. Both of my grandfathers are ex-Navy in the 50s and 60s. And now I'm learning a lot of stuff that like my family didn't know, that they're not necessarily super proud of. And so for me, like, wow, like that's a really evocative experience that not everyone is going to get. We did another one called Dreadnoughts and Diplomacy, which is the one that like, if I could make into a tabletop game, I absolutely would, but like you need 15 people to play it. And there's not really a market for 15 to 20 person tabletop games. Maybe there is, but so in it, you're basically you're leading a country. One person is a diplomat, one person is a warmonger. And the idea is that you're trying to either ratchet up or like diffuse international tension. But once you hit a breaking point, that international tension can no longer go down. It can only go up. And you get a small amount of points if you go to war and win if you're a diplomat. And if you get a large amount of points if you go to war and win if you're a warmonger, and you don't get any points for either class if you go to war and lose. So at some point, the diplomats in that game have to say, well, war is basically inevitable. I'll throw my back into making sure that we can start murdering each other. And when you're trying to teach World War I politics to a group of like 19-year-olds who have never really considered that kind of tension is really hard to deal with. That was another one where they're like, yeah, at one point, even if I didn't want war, like it just felt like it was inevitable. And it was, which is exactly what happened in human history. It basically was, we hit a point where even if Archduke Ferdinand wasn't killed, we were probably all going to go to war at some point for something. It could have been a sheep for all we know. Like it could have been anything. And it was something that was really cool. But yeah, those are the things that I enjoyed. Those are probably the two that I'm most proud of for educational goals. And then I think like everybody, there's a game that I've got that I wish had succeeded and didn't do a really good job. I made a game called Man Your Battle Stations. And it's about running the human resources department on the Death Star. Yes.
Will just came back with so much concern on his face. Yep. He was like,
It is called Man Your Battle Stations, and it is literally you're not a soldier, you're not a commander, you're just the guy in charge of staffing the Death Star. Or we called them a battle moon because you can't actually do it, but it's essentially you and everyone else are competing HR managers trying to staff your Death Star first. And I love that game so much, but it's so bad. It's such a failure. That's the one that I go back to in the Shadow Realm folder and I look at and I'm like, there's got to be a way I can.
Maybe someday.
Maybe someday. Exactly.
I love that.
That sounds so fantastic.
It was so dirt. So the idea is that like you have to hit a value of 21 points in staff. But if you go over your staff, you bust like in blackjack and you wind up losing staff members. So you could either add staff to your team or shall we say like internally push them to a different department. So you'd give a staff member to another player to try and bust them. It just like on paper, it looked great. It felt great. I was super excited about it. And then it just played like garbage.
Aw, but I mean, like, and then you could do like events where like, like, oh, Darth Vader comes and kills 5 of your staff members. It happens.
We had generic Space Knight, which was like a Jedi that came in and took care of your guys, and then I was like some dark overlord that like if you were under a certain threshold, you got force choked and something happened to you. That's amazing. It was super fun, but it's just not a game that worked. So long answer to a short question there, Alex. But those are probably the 4 games that I still think about more than anything else.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Those are all like amazing. So Ahead of the Curve and Dreadnoughts and Diplomacy, are those available like as print and play, or are they at the
They
Mount
are-
St. Mary's Library?
I believe they're technically available still on Mount St. Mary's curriculum page. But if you would like access to those, I do still have the original PDFs, so I can send them over to Garrett.
If you could, I would love to do that from, because when we do weekly meetings, we do like games. I would love to play those games.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is definitely a thing that we can provide. It's
I'd
again,
like to have an
Thank you
educational
so
game
much.
night, because we
Yeah.
don't really talk about educational games, and that sounds, I mean, like a
it
key
is.
part.
Well, I mean, I'm fortunate in that that's kind of how I got my consultant role, because that's something that I think a lot of game designers are like, man, I could sell this to homeschool groups, or this is something that I could maybe add as an additional, feather in my cap to make it more sellable. I was supposed to start another consultant job. Again, COVID derailed that. I was supposed to work with Haba USA, which is really annoying because they're like, yeah, we pushed back hiring that position because they're putting their furloughed workers on that. Now I'm like, dang it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I can send that over too. Absolutely. And the offer, of course, to join it, if you are ever in Hanover, Pennsylvania, and you ever want to join in on a playtest group, seriously, bring your stuff.
I have family that lives there, so
Me
that's
too, actually. That's funny.
It is.
Wow.
I mean, it's hopefully when all this is said and done, but it's something that like has been really beneficial for me personally too, because now I have like a captured audience where they're like, oh, we've got yes, time to play some games. They're like, sweet. So we'll try some new stuff. Yeah, but seriously, I will send those over to Garrett and we'll see what you guys think. It's been a while. I'll brush the dust off them. Hopefully they're as good as I remember them being, but
I
'cause
mean,
we had,
I
like,
would, yeah.
we had a
they
big
sound
poster
amazing.
board map for it, and like, I mean, we had like the art students like sketch it up for extra credit. It was so
No, we're trying to
Yeah.
get the art department too. So I mean, like, heck yeah, that sounds amazing.
well. I mean, you guys are in a really unique position being in a college that there's a lot of resources that are readily available to you now that are probably never going to be readily available to you again. So, for example, two of my friends actually just successfully kickstarted one of their games. It's called Gladius, but you're managing a gladiator ludus. That's like you're managing a gladiatorial school. I have not played the game, so I can't vouch for how good it is, but it got kickstarted, so good, kudos to them. The only reason I bring it up though is they went to their local art school, and they found a student whose portfolio they liked, and because she was still a student, her rates were really good. They were really cheap because art's really expensive for a game. So you guys have access to like graphic design majors, artists, school resources. We have a 3D printer at the college that I used to go to. And I'm like, man, like you got it after I graduated. How many game pieces could I have made with this thing? We were printing out on index cards like a peasant. But you've got access to like a lot of good resources now, like in terms of both technology and personnel that you wouldn't necessarily have, I think, otherwise. So yeah, I mean,
wow.
like leverage those. I mean, have a game jam at your school, have a design contest at your school.
Yeah, we try to hold some yearly, but it's this year it was they're usually the spring semester, so
Yeah,
but yeah.
Everything got derailed this year. Yeah, COVID's a jerk.
Yeah, we had a really cool game jam one year. It was like my first year on the Indies, and it was like the first year Indies was made. And we went into the art department and we set up in their gallery, and we did a 48-hour game jam in their gallery with art students.
That was
that's
It was
awesome.
amazing.
That was an interesting experience for sure.
It was very interesting. Well, I mean, that's game. I mean, like you're crunched for time. That's how I don't know. It felt like a real experience.
Grace,
Well-
did you ever play the game that Alex Titus and I made?
Yeah, I played all the games.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Nice.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, that's awesome. Like that's the experience. Like we didn't have that in college. I was the first one to do that with my school. Like we did not have a games and history course until I came along, and my professor, because I used to play like professional Magic basically, and my professor heard about that and was like, "Hey, I know history, you know games. Do you want to work together?" That didn't happen. That didn't exist before I was there. I'm not gonna lie. I'm a lot jealous. Like I would have loved to like lock myself in with the art majors and be like, "Time to make some games." Like it would have been because that would have been fun. But
Oh my God. I'm Mount St. Mary's. I know someone who goes to Mount St. Mary's. Like I'm really close to them. So I'm definitely going to be like, pick their brain and like when they go back to school, get into that, go drive up there, get into that.
I mean, they like, I don't know if they still teach the course or not. That's something I'm not sure if they still do or not, but they definitely still have. I visited last year, and they definitely still have the board games in the library. And it's a pretty good. There's nothing like exotic. Like you're not gonna find, your Kickstarter. You're not gonna find like Fourth Trench or whatever, like your Kickstarter exclusives. But I mean, there's a really strong like library of classics there that you could probably like make a day of it, play through 10, 15 games, and experience like 10 or 15 of the biggest evergreens that are out there, and then you get an idea of what is popular and what has succeeded. But that being said, though, too, like don't be afraid to break away from that mold, because this is, I don't know if COVID is going to end it, but we're living in the golden age of game design, at least for tabletop games. Like there are so many weird, interesting things that are making like. Has anyone ever played Fog of Love or heard of Fog of Love?
Yes. Oh my God, I love that game.
Right? So you're like for those of you who aren't initiated, you role play basically as a couple going through a bunch of different couple problems. And it could be anything from like, oh my God, like my mom is getting old. Do we let her move into our house? To should we have sex on this hiking trail? Like we might get caught. I'm not even joking.
It's so good.
I played it with one of my guy friends, like from the GameStop. We played it. We're role playing as like we're like a couple. He's married. I'm in a relationship, and it's so funny because like we're like his wife's in the background going, "I hate you so much." Like it's so
it's amazing.
Dinner with my boss, the CEO of Japanime Games, and like a couple other like bigwigs. They're like, "Hey, Kyle, like, come out." This was we were at New York City Toy Fair. They're like, "Oh, come out for Duck." And I was like, "Duck sounds really expensive." My boss like, "Don't worry about it. You're not paying." Which again, like, is the best thing in the world. That's another benefit of networking. Like, if you know the right people, you get the right stuff. Like, WizKids just launched a game called Etten, which is a drafting game where you're drafting for the person sitting next to you, and they're drafting for you. And eventually, you're gonna have to kill each other. Which is really intriguing. And I was like, oh, I really want to get a copy of that. So traditionally, what you do at these conventions is you swap games. So if we have an open copy of one of our games, you'll go over to a booth, say, hey, do you want to make a trade? And they'll swap games with you. It's super fun. They didn't want to trade the game. And I was like, oh, man, I was complaining about it to my boss. And he goes, which game? Which company? All right, give me a sec. And he walks off. I see him text his phone. Like 10 minutes later, the guy from WizKids comes over. Are you Kyle with Yellow Games? Yeah, I am. Oh, here's your copy of Etten. I put my business card in there, too, just in case anything's out of the ordinary. Thanks. Have a great day. I look at my boss. I'm like, did you threaten his family? What did you do?
The mafia of game development companies.
Oh, and that's another thing too. Like with relationships, like the industry in any capacity is so small. Like there are like if you can make or break yourself on the reputation you build really quickly. I know a couple people who have worked with some of my coworkers who can no longer find a job because they're just like, they're deemed like persona non grata. They're just like not good people to work with or around or for. And as a result of that, no one will touch them. So they might, even if they're great, like how many of you guys anyone played Fireball Island or heard of Fireball Island? Alex is raising his hand. Yeah, they redid that one. And there's a guy named J.R. Honeycutt who designed a bunch of really popular games now in the last 5 years. And it turns out he was like emotionally abusive. And as a result, now he can't find work, period. And the guy's been responsible for like 15 of like the top 100 best-selling games in the last 5 years. And he is that good. But like, if you're like that, man, no one will work with you.
We ain't about that.
Yeah, we know. It be like that. It do.
It really do.
It really do be like that.
I mean, I know that was. I'm not laughing, but I'm just laughing because I wish that I wish under other industries were so good about that kind of
Hollywood.
I'm not gonna name names, but that kind of exclusion for people, like relationships actually do matter. It's not just about making money; it's about the passion. And then, I think that is a really big part.
There's not enough money in this industry for it to be about the money, at least for the tabletop side of things. Video games is a different, so for example, board games just hit $1 billion valuation status as an industry 3 or 4 years ago. Video games are like a $50 billion industry. very different in terms of the amount of cash rolling through it, but still important. Like those relationships are still important. And what we're seeing now is a lot more diversity, I think, in the people making games. Wingspan is made by Elizabeth Hargrave, who has used a lot of her money and her clout now to help work with female developers. I know and work with a number of gender non-binary people. I work with a lot of people who are gay, bisexual, biracial, whatever. As a result of this industry, I have a friend, her name is Mindy. She is one of the heads for the US Toy Association. We were at the Game Manufacturers Expo, and someone's like, oh, you could play this game. It's the girly one that has cute stuff. Oh boy. And not knowing who she was, right. But the thing is, so the trade-off with that, though, is that's becoming far less common now, because people are like, we're diversifying, and that's a good thing. I think that's a positive thing for the industry, I think, overall. But
I completely agree.
Yeah, it's slowly fits and starts, but
yeah,
I
think the board game industry is a lot better about it than the video game industry. But I mean, that's just personal opinion. Don't want to.
No, I think you're right. I mean, part of it is that it's. I think there's a stratification of like who gets certain jobs. I think there are far fewer female programmers than there are female artists and graphic designers. And I think as a result of that, I think it's harder to ignore the body of work that some women do in the industry, and it's easier for those women to say, hey, there's a spot for me, thus there's a spot for other women, or there's a spot for me as a gender non-binary person, there's a spot for other gender non-binary individuals. And whether that's a good or a bad thing is, or rather that's here or there, or whatever factors that go into that. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a sociologist. I don't know I can only speculate, and I'm not going to do that because that's how we get into problems.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I think for the most part, I think it's a consequence of there being an opportunity for individuals to start at the ground level and then move their way up. And if you are working in video games too, I know QA is usually the first step through that. I know a couple of my friends have worked in QA and then worked their way up to different positions. But some level of computer programming is there, and you're going to be doing a lot of grunt work. So, is what it is. I like my industry, I think, a lot more than I liked working in video games. Neither of them are particularly stable when you're at the ground level, but I think there's more opportunity where I'm at. I'll say that much from my experience.
I would. Oh my God, yeah. Especially board games. I think they are easier to get funded on Kickstarter because you see a result quicker. For sure, development wise. But that's just, again, my opinion.
No, they still enjoy the highest funded rate of all projects. In 2017, 50% of all board game projects on Kickstarter got funded. 50% was the success rate. 50. Now it's somewhere like around like 20, 26%. It fluctuates. But I mean, it's still a lot higher. I think video games is like 5%, 2%, something. Like it's a stupid downgrade from where you are from board games to video games. And that means that you guys as students too could say, hey, we've got a number of people here together. We've got artists, we've got graphic designers. There's nothing stopping you from putting together a game and saying, setting a reasonable funding goal on Kickstarter, like $500 or $1,000, and then getting that out there and published and in the hands of people.
Yeah.
Like there's nothing stopping you from doing that. I will say, I didn't put this in the presentation, but it is something I think would be really helpful. For your portfolios, if you are going to work in game design, you do need to have a solid portfolio of things that you can show people. And so if you have 2 or 3 smaller games that you've done small print runs of, like a 200 game print run, 300 game print run, maybe you're lucky to get 1,000 games printed or whatever, or 1,000 downloads or 2,000 downloads on your iPhone app or whatever, right? The game that you put in the Play Store, there's a lot of room for you to experiment and, to find games that like, or to basically to not pad your resume, but to create projects that you can show to prospective employers and be like, I don't just have a degree. I have a track record of proven projects. As an employer, I think that's pretty enticing. That's how I got my job with Yellow. I called my boss and was like, hey, listen, I made 12 games, worked in escape rooms, made some mobile games. I was out of the industry. I had just started teaching, and I was like, I want to get back in because I miss it. And I have no idea. I don't know what the first place to start is. And he was like, come to PAX Unplugged with me, and we'll see how you work. And that was for now we're 6 shows, a consultancy job, and a potential trip to Germany later with the company, which is all expenses paid, which is the most exciting phrase in my entire life. Other than, here's your company credit card, which is also a sentence that is getting tossed around now, which is a terrifying prospect.
Yeah, wow.
But it's a great prospect, right? Like, that's the thing. Like, you'll find your ways in there, but you need, like, I didn't get that job. I wouldn't have gotten that job if I didn't have a track record of work that I could show them, or that I could talk about. Or if he was like, hey, can you send me, Dreadnoughts and Diplomacy so we can do a history-based game night with our club? That happened, right? Yeah, like, that's super important. I'm sorry, I realize that we're like, this has been a super long presentation. Hopefully I'm not taking away from anyone's time, am I? I don't want to.
No,
Nope.
but we probably should wrap up soon just so we can get I know a lot of people are excited for the recording on the Discord, so.
Yeah, awesome.
So.
Well, I mean, like I said, if you guys need me to do this again, I know recordings are great, but there's no substitute to actually have somebody to talk with.
I mean, I would love to do that maybe closer to the summertime if you are free at any point, because I know that a lot of people get free after the next 2 or 3 weeks, probably June.
Yeah, we can do that. The unfortunate aspect of this is that, so all of the shows this summer that would usually be getting done have all been either canceled or rescheduled. So the Origins Expo in Columbus has been moved to October. The UK Games Expo has been canceled entirely. There's some talk that Gen Con might get canceled. So yeah, it's a huge, I mean, it's a huge bummer. I mean, E3 was canceled too for this year. So, I mean, it's hitting every industry pretty hard. So the positive aspect of that is I have some time in my schedule to actually give back to some people who were I was about 3 years ago, which is pretty exciting to do. I'm not gonna lie. I see, like, it's always, well, it's fun. I mean, this is what we were talking about. Like, my boss was in the same position I was in when he was 26 and I called him. And you guys are probably in the same position that I was in when I called him as well. And eventually, as weird as it might sound, because you guys are all college students, at some point in your lives, there's probably going to be a moment where you're like, oh crap, this is the kid that was me 6 or 7 years ago that I can give back to right now. So, I mean, it really is something that's like super positive in the industry. That's the reason I keep coming back, because the people are really great. Like, I don't think I've worked with a better group of folks. So, but I will open it up to any more questions if you guys have anything else. I have jabbered on for long enough, I think.
I think most of us got to ask a question, actually.
Which is good.
Yep.
Yeah,
so. Is good. Garrett, anything else for the good of the order, my friend?
No.
Cool.
No.
All right. Well, with that said, then, that's it for me, guys. Thank you so much for being a great audience. You guys asked some really great questions. I was worried I was gonna like get to the end and it was just gonna be radio silence. So.
Not with our club. We're always very talkative. But thank you so much. I didn't mean that way. I mean, like, we're really
No. Engagement is good. I really appreciate it. So.
What Grace means to say is we're just the worst.
We're not. No, don't say that.
Just a garbage bunch of individuals.
No.